Testing, testing, testing. Blah, 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 blah.
Ready, set, go.
It's time for the Coach Amy and Coach Liz show.
A podcast for endurance athletes by two athletes, two coaches, and a physical therapist.
We are your hosts, Coach Amy
And Coach Liz.
coming to you from Kansas City. Okay.
This is our third one today. I feel like we're getting tongue-tied.
This is our third. I don't know. We're just getting better. We're warming up. We're just warming up,
We're like
people.
fine wine we get better with age or something.
Yeah. And time.
And time.
We're stewing in our juices.
Oh,
that's gross. Take that out. Edit. All right. What were you going to tell me?
well, so I was listening to a podcast on the way over.
Okay.
Because I do listen to podcasts.
Yeah.
All kinds of
Unlike
stuff.
me.
Unlike Amy. Anyway, it was really interesting because, so I was listening to Rich Roll, who is an endurance guy. I love him. His podcast is fantastic. And he was interviewing, this is a slightly older one. It was May 6th. He was interviewing Andy Ramage, I think is how you say his name. He's a very spirited little guy. Anyway, they were talking, so this Andy guy has like made his... It caught my attention because they were talking about Athletic Brewing Company, which is that non-alcoholic beer that's it's like at the end of a lot of races now.
Oh.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I remember the first race I went to where it was there, and I was like, that is the weirdest thing ever. Like, who's going to drink that? But they were interviewing this guy, and that Athletic Brewing, if I'm remembering this right, but in like the past 5 years, it's grown to become like, it was something like the third largest brewery in the U.S. or something. It's crazy. And so he was talking about the huge explosion of NA beers, which are non-alcoholic beers, and like what a huge industry it's become. And it was which was just interesting. And the thing that I liked about him, that's what caught my attention and made me think of like endurance sports, right? But he was also, and I thought, well, this is interesting because as our listeners know that, addiction and substance misuse has just been a big part of my lived experience.
And a lot of athletes have that background.
Well, and that's why part of the reason I really like Rich Roll is because he was an alcoholic pretty severely. And, there's a lot of overlap sometimes. Like you can get into, addictive behavior is very sneaky and it can get into training as much as it can into like substance misuse as like, it's really fascinating and it really is just this whole idea that like we're trying to do something that like helps us feel better. And so you can do that in a lot of different ways. So like, I think people think about like addiction or substance misuse as like, looking a very specific way when it can really like manifest in a lot of different behaviors in our life. But what I really just caught my attention and I loved about this conversation with Rich Roll is that this guy has like kind of made it his like life mission to talk to what he called the middle lane people who are like, they're not people who like, they don't fit the stereotype that we generally have about somebody with like a real substance abuse problem. They're people who like are kind of in that middle lane and like maybe they drink a little like more than they should, or they're not sure if they have a problem, or like, which I think is a huge number of people. And there's not really much dialogue at this point around like that. And I feel like that is like, we bring up the word like substance misuse or addiction. And I think very quickly we like think we know what that looks like. And I will tell you, as having had like, 4 or 5 family members with addiction issues, none of them look the same. And it you can't tell from looking from the outside, but we don't know that. There's not a lot of conversation about that. And I think we're really missing a big amount of conversation with people who do fall in that middle lane. And I've had like, people say to me, like, I don't like check all the boxes for what would be like an addiction problem, but like I have to do X, Y, or Z. And it was really interesting to hear somebody like just like giving language to that and like being really specific about it. And what was fascinating to me is that he was somebody he considered himself a middle laner, and like, he was like, maybe you'd call him a heavy drinker or whatever. And he works in the brokerage industry, which I guess is like a big party industry, right? And so he was a ringleader, so he would always be the one taking people out to dinners or whatever, and he was the drinker, and so he'd order the drink first, and then everybody at the table would drink. And he decided to stop drinking, and now he will go and he will not drink. And he said that oftentimes like something like half the table will also not order a drink because they now feel like they have permission to not.
It is
So
a thing. It's a thing in my husband's industry too. Marketing,
Yeah.
advertising. Anytime you're entertaining clients.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was just so interesting. And the conversation around like, you know, what like middle length drinking looks like, and like the whole explosion of like being sober curious. And now there's apparently like a non-alcoholic bar in LA that like has lines out the door, and like it's just
All mocktails.
It's all mocktails. Mm-hmm. It just blew my mind, and I thought it was so cool. And you know, we talk a lot about health on this podcast, obviously, for endurance athletes, and you know, they're just like some of the health stuff that they're coming out with about around alcohol and that kind of stuff. And I think that's really helpful and it's interesting, but I think it really misses the boat in terms of like talking about, for some people it's not like, sure, maybe they know it's not the most healthy thing, and they're not somebody who's like the stereotypical alcoholic, but they're in this area where they're kind of struggling with
gray
it.
area.
That gray area.
Yeah.
And they're like, you know, just listening to a podcast about like the health effects on your performance and like your overall health, because alcohol's
the
really bad
inflammation
for you.
alone. The inflammation alone
It's
from
pretty.
alcohol.
It's pretty scary. Some
It
of the
is.
stuff. But you know, that doesn't. We eat stuff that's. I'm not advocating for
Right.
that at all. I'm just saying that, like, you know, maybe you hear that and you're health conscious, and you would like to change your patterns around what you're drinking, or you're considering that, but you're not somebody that's like, you know, this what you think of as a stereotypical alcoholic. And there's just a really lack in language and conversation around what that looks
But
like
it's
and feels
opening
like.
up
But
now
it's
is the
opening
point.
up.
And there's
I think
there's
it's great.
alternatives out there now too.
There's alternatives. And so
Yeah.
I was just thrilled and thought it was such a great, insightful conversation. And Rich Roll's great, and he's endurance. And that's all I got.
Okay, but it's not what our episode's about.
It's not what our episode's about. That was supposed to be
right.
our intro, but here I go rambling. Shocking.
But it's great. It's
You were
great.
warned at the beginning. I'm getting tongue-tied. Now I'm going to shut up. What are we
Okay,
talking
so
about?
what are we talking about today? So aside from that topic, which I think is really important and good, what are we talking about? Open up your note page, because this is a little confusing, because we
Can you even read my notes?
no. Which episode is it where we talk about single leg drills and that smoothness in cycling?
I can't remember. But we did talk about it. And what you were talking about with that is that you had a runner that was coming to cycling, right? And he was getting into cycling, and his cycle pedal stroke was real jerky, and we talked about how you can use the single leg stroke to smooth out the pedal stroke.
Yes. And so after we had that episode and we were kind of talking about it together, then I went out for a run and I was like, oh, wow, there is a connection between these two things. And that is the smoothness of your run gait, because the same thing can happen in running. It's just not noticeable because you're not on this machine that is obviously telling you that you're getting this like sort of this hitch, this sort of gap
So what
in
you're
your
saying
power.
is that like when we notice like the hitch in our cycle stroke because we get feedback from the bike because it hitches, but we're not getting feedback about how
run.
smooth our run gait is.
No. And it's a piece of feedback that will show up in your data and how you feel in that you're super inefficient.
And you're losing a lot of energy to that hitch.
Yes. And so it is happening. But we have another episode where we talk about pre-acting, meaning firing up those muscles, those landing muscles, split seconds before you land. In the run. Yes. And it's that instead of reacting to the ground, we're engaging right before we land. And if we have that going on, that is where we have the smoothness in our run gait. And when we don't, which a lot of people out there, and it will happen to me, as soon as I get tired or distracted a little bit too much, especially fatigued though, I will start reacting to the ground. And then I'll be like, oh, no, smack myself in the head. So that reaction instead of pre-acting, okay, that's the hitch in your run gait.
Okay.
So I think that's still good for runners to hear, even if you're not a cyclist, but there are a lot of cyclists who come to running. So a lot of cyclists that enter triathlon and struggle with the run. And this, I think, is just it's a verbal cue that I would use now with any of my patients that are saying, that are really strong. Maybe I could use that verbal cue with them. They're really strong on the bike and they understand that hit. And I can say, oh, just like the bike, we have that with running. And then that'll be just an easier way for them to maybe understand that
Sure.
That smoothness in the run gait that we're trying to achieve, that efficiency. I noticed when I first started doing triathlon, everyone was like, "Oh, the bike off the run, it's so hard." Blah, blah, blah,
You
blah.
mean the run off the bike?
Yes, what'd I just say?
Bike off the run.
Never mind. The run off the bike was as hard. For me, it wasn't. And I kept thinking, what are they talking about? Because every time I got off the bike to the run, I felt great. And it was because I was already neurologically warmed up for that smoothness. That lack of that hitch was just right, already warmed up, ready to go. It's like I didn't have to think about it at all. And it was there. And that's just a great way to start a run. So
that's really interesting.
Yeah. If you missed our episode about pre-acting and anticipating the landing on your run to get more run economy and power, go back and listen to episode 28, How to Get More Power Out of Your Run Before Your Foot Hits the Ground.
Thanks so much for listening. And remember,
we are in this together. Until next time.